Did you know that in 2023, according to the U.S. Department of State's progress report on Biden's climate change finance pledge, the U.S. spent $9.5 billion on climate change? For comparison, in 2023, the U.S. national debt rose to $33.1 trillion. The regulation of climate change is not a worthy use of government funds. I have done extensive research on this topic, and I'm extremely passionate about it. I will be discussing the values of climate change and government spending, establishing my criteria, and proving these criteria through my application. How the government spends money is relevant to everyone because the money that they spend comes from us through our taxes, so we should make sure it goes to worthy causes. So now that we understand this topic, let's move on to both the value and the limitations of what we'll be discussing today. My argument is based on the values of government spending and climate change. Using government funds towards regulating climate change should not be part of your most important values. So we're going to need some definitions for today. First off, government spending, which according to the Corporate Finance Institute in 2024, is money spent by the public sector on the acquisition of goods and provision of services. Similarly, taxes, which according to Merriam-Webster in 2024, are a charge usually of money imposed by authority on persons or property for public purposes. Climate change, according to the UN in 2024, are long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. And similarly, climate change mitigation, according to NASA in 2024, involves reducing the flow of heat-trapping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Today, I will be limiting the discussion to government spending specifically in the United States. So now that we have discussed the value of my argument, let's get into the criteria. Government mitigation of climate change increases financial burden on taxpayers, leads to job loss, and disproportionately affects populations. So now that we've discussed the criteria of this topic, let's get into my practical application. Criteria number 1, government mitigation on climate change increases financial burden on taxpayers. It does this by raising taxes for Americans through implementation of green taxes, which are one of the major ways the government implements climate mitigation. According to Milne from EcoStar in 2007, green taxes are tax increases that either discourage activities or commodities that are environmentally damaging, or tax decreases that encourage those that are environmentally beneficial. Green taxes that discourage activities put financial strain on Americans, such as increased taxes on energy inefficient vehicles. It also increases financial burden by increasing the national debt, because when the government spends money on climate change mitigation, such as the development of renewable energy sources, it raises the national debt. My second criteria, government spending on climate change leads to job loss. Government regulation and mitigation leads to job loss in industries that are reliant on fossil fuels. When the government regulates these industries, companies are forced to downsize, and that causes them to lay off workers. Companies may also be forced to relocate, also having them have to lay off their employees. Companies that are specifically affected by this are those that are in the oil drilling or coal mining industries. And criteria number 3. Government spending on climate change disproportionately affects populations. Low-income populations struggle to afford things like carbon taxes. According to Manny from PwC in 2023, the U.S. currently has 33 green taxes in place. The government also gives tax breaks to Americans who use green energy sources, which may not be financially possible for low-income Americans. According to the U.S. Department of Treasury in 2023, Americans saved $8.4 billion on clean energy in 2023 in tax cuts. However, those who can't afford clean energy sources are denied these tax cuts when they're the ones that need it the most. Another thing they may not be able to afford are green energy methods, which are more expensive than fossil fuels. For example, according to Odell from the National Resource Defense Council in 2023, electric cars range from 18 to 59% more expensive than gas vehicles. It's more difficult for low-income Americans to afford these vehicles, and if the government were to pass harsh regulations against gas cars, it could be devastating for some families. The value of climate change is not important because it's not an urgent matter, and the government funding should not be wasted on it. So in conclusion, The regulation of climate change is not a worthy use of government funds. Today, we discuss the value of climate change and how it's unimportant, as well as government spending and how it shouldn't be put towards the unimportant value of climate change. Government spending on climate change increases financial burden on taxpayers, leads to job loss, and disproportionately affects Americans. These statements are proven through both research on climate change and on government spending. So, the next time you're looking at your paycheck or shopping, pay attention to how much you're spending on taxes and question where exactly that money is going.